Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Regular, and today I'm joined by licensed psychologist and speaker, Dr. Josh Mermelli. In this episode, Dr. Josh explores the power of embracing uncertainty, managing self-doubt, and gaining confidence in both life and the therapy room. His biggest lesson: growth happens when you lean into the unknown and show up as a human, not just a textbook. Thank you so much for joining me. I am really excited to talk with you, but before we begin, I just wanted to check in. How are you really?
I love that question. How are you really? I am doing well. I'm a father of two little ones. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and am in a lovely marriage and have a full-time practice. So my cup's a little full, but I should say, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm doing really great, and it's an honor to be here. And I think I was sharing with you, it's taken us a while to schedule, but hopefully the wait will be worth it. And I think it will be.
I definitely think so too, because I'm excited for our topic. So I restarted therapy about 3 weeks ago out here in California since I moved. And one thing that I've been talking about with my therapist about why I loved moving, or I love the idea of moving, is because I love my family so much. But a lot of the roles that I get into is I can't break out of that being seen as the child and kind of like putting into the parentification role, but I'm never able to be seen as more than a kid. That's really difficult for me. So no matter how much I try to grow, how much I try to do, how far I come, it's like I'm always stuck in that same role. And then I revert back to like these old behavior patterns that don't even fit me anymore.
I love that. And I think it's fabulous that you're referencing this sort of regression that takes place when we're back into our family of origin and that environment. I basically do everything but crawl when I'm back with my family of origin in certain ways. And I've learned to differentiate and to be this autonomous father, adult, psychologist person, and it's really challenging, that sort of back and forth and give and take, for sure. Because these roles are somewhat scripted and very hard to break free from.
Yes, they are. And I don't think I even was aware of it until I'd been traveling a lot back and forth across the country. So I was home for a few days at a time for about a year. And then I was home full time for 3 full weeks back for the holidays for Christmas. And
Wow, that's ambitious.
yes, it was a big change. And my car was finally in California, but now I wasn't.
Wow.
I couldn't go anywhere. I was completely dependent on my family. So I realized how, because that was my entire circle and how I needed them to give me a ride, help me get food, how easy it was to fall back into feeling like this kind of hopeless, powerless, damsel in distress version of me that I haven't seen in like 6 years.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look, I think in family systems, each family member tends to adopt specific, somewhat circumscribed or even stereotypic roles, ultimately to maintain homeostasis. And this is often an unconscious process. And these roles can be adaptive or maladaptive, especially in maybe dysfunctional, chaotic, or high stress family environments. And there are some common roles, and we may identify fitting certain roles at different times. But again, the goal is to maintain equilibrium within the family unit.
Okay, so I learned about this recently in school, and that was a big thing too, looking back. And so I ended up in a psychiatric unit when I was 20, so about 6 years ago,
Hmm.
suicide attempts. And no matter how much therapy and tools I was learning, and I was even able to implement them a lot outside of the home life. But as soon as I was back in the home, because everything else was kind of I love my family, by the way. Like, side note, everyone,
Hmm.
parents are great. Oh, that's great. But because of how the structure was and the dysfunction, I was, no one else was adapting to how I was changing. So no matter how
Right.
that push forward and change, everyone's kind of behavior and actions pushed me back into that role and didn't allow me to.
Yes. Well, I want to honor what you just said on so many levels. As a clinician myself, I can tell you that all the training, all the education aside, what really puts me in the room with someone who's in deep duress and pain is having been there myself. And I think it's really a critical ingredient to be a qualified and effective clinician to have gone through real shit and to get to the other side of that. And so I want to just like honor your disclosure because I think that that's so powerful and will be a catalyst for helping so many people. And I have my journey through pain as well. Don't we all on some level? And I also love that you paid homage and honored, by the way, I love my family and have great relationships. And as do I. Every family, I like to say, is a little bit of a dysfunction junction. We all have our stuff. And our parents, excuse my language, kind of fuck us up the best way they know how, with all the love and tools and skills that they had access to. And so, in spite of having a really loving, nurturing family system, as you're describing, when your role changed, everyone else was kind of like, wait a second, what's going on here? It threatens their, again, stereotypic familiar role that's all intended to maintain this homeostasis. So, I want to just kind of commemorate what you said on many different levels.
Thank you. I love what you said about the family experience and helping you be qualified as a therapist because I have some teachers who are like, yes, that is so great. And then I have some teachers who are like, never say it, put your social media on private, don't let anyone know. So hearing someone validate that really helps. Um,
Right.
yes, with my family, I love the way you described it. They did the best they could with the tools that they had and based on the cultures they grew up in. My family was very traditional Italian Catholic. So the girl was quiet and silent and did what she was told. And I became a people pleaser who always was trying to make everyone like her. And when everyone
Mm,
wanted different things from me at once and I couldn't satisfy each person, I became very overwhelmed and I was shut down a lot. So then when I finally, after really struggling, I think I was said yes, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna talk about it. And I was
wow.
boundaries. And that was not something anyone in my family did. We didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk, especially not going online and saying, I was detailed, but it's a deaf unit. Not something we were gonna do. So I started becoming more outspoken, willing to say, no, I can't do this. This is too much for me. And they did not know how to respond because that was
Hmm.
different from what they had grown up believing and doing and seeing. And 20 years of my life, me being that exact same person in that role that I was kind of born into.
Right. Yeah. So it was a totally new script, a new landscape for you and for them. I always tell people my first drug of choice was your approval. So I really relate to this people-pleasing history and background. And again, kudos to you for setting some of these boundaries and limits. And boundaries are really just a cookbook for instructing other people on how we like to be treated and regarded. And the hardest boundaries typically to set are the ones we set with ourselves, and setting a boundary is one thing, honoring it and enforcing it is certainly another. So it's a journey.
Yes, it is. And that's been learning. Yeah, Judge, you said learning to set boundaries to myself. And
Mhm.
I think what I won't tolerate, but also what I won't tolerate from myself because a lot of times I was putting myself in the situation, setting myself up. The other day, I followed my dad to tell him what I was doing and then asked him to tell me, was that good? Is that what I should
Mhm.
be doing?
Mhm.
And he was like, I would do it differently. He gave me this full thing, and I was like, okay, I'm not good enough. I'm doing it wrong. I put
Mm,
myself into the position because I went and asked, I seek his approval for something that I probably knew was going to be different than the way he approached it, which is why I wanted him to justify why I was doing it that way. It was for like, honestly, sending out emails to try to get like school districts to pick up my workbooks. It was not anything. There was just some business question, but I put myself into the position to seek his approval when it wasn't given to me in the way that I wanted. I was like, oh no,
hmm
what's wrong with me? And that was
mm,
into a boundary I had set with myself that I totally crossed.
right. Well, look, I think wanting approval and wanting validation is inherently human. I mean, who doesn't want that? And one of the things I've started doing in my life personally is asking for what I want. So you may want to, in the future, consider calling your dad and saying, you know what, Dad? I'm really proud of this endeavor that I'm participating in right now. I would love some validation from you. That would mean a lot to me. We can ask for that.
So smart. I don't know why I do not think of that, but it's so true. We can ask for what we want and need.
Yes, yes. And we're afraid to. And I think we're afraid to because we fear judgment, we fear our needs not being met. But being more explicit about what those needs are is such a great pathway to actually having those needs validated, heard, and honored.
I remember like post psych unit, my parents didn't know what to say to communicate with me about my mental health because it was so new. So I made them like a script and a guide. And I was like, I only want you to say
Mm,
paper, don't go off script.
wow.
Back then, what I was doing was seeking, telling them what I wanted and creating that safe space for us to have a healthy communication so they could understand what I was feeling. But I'm not, I mean, it's so difficult when your child looks at you and says, like, I don't want to be alive anymore. To see that you're, of
Mm, mm.
course, they don't know what to say. And they grow up for that excuse. So I gave them that guide, and I didn't realize how smart that was until right now.
That's actually brilliant and powerful. How did they receive that?
In the beginning, they were not. They were really confused. I remember my dad being very angry because it felt like he failed as a father. I remember my mom being really sad because she was like, what did I do wrong? So when I gave them the script and they weren't allowed to talk about themselves in that moment, they had to only hear what I was saying and validate it, kind of paraphrase it back to me so that I could see that they were understanding it and really create that space of non-judgmental open-ended questions. It couldn't be like a direct hit at me. What it couldn't be what is wrong with you.
Mm,
Um, that was really hard for them, but they started following that script and
wow.
it changed everything. Sometimes they actually have copies of that workbook, the first one with it. And sometimes I'll notice that they're using the exact language from it now. And I'm like,
Hey. They're honoring it. And even listening to you creating this script for them, what I'm hearing is that you oscillated between several roles within the family system really remarkably, from this identified patient, the member of the family who's labeled as having the problem, the issue, our daughter who was experiencing suicidality, to this caregiver, prioritizing sort of nurturing, caring for others, sometimes at the expense of personal needs. But in this case, it was in favor of a personal need, which I think was really powerful.
exactly. And you know what? I think that really transitioned my kind of desire to be that caretaker to a place where it wasn't necessarily serving me in the same way anymore. So
Hmm.
I was doing it maybe to take back some kind of autonomy and independence, having a voice, feeling like I also mattered and was at the table.
Yeah.
But then I became so, my grandmother was in a car accident around the same time of my suicide attempts. She survived, my grandfather didn't. She broke almost into her body. I slept in a muscle chair next to her, took care of her, flew back
Wow.
into while going to school so I could be her like caretakers, I was on red eyes all the time, and be a student. So I jumped into then wanting to be a caretaker for other people at the expense of myself up until I realized I can't really function well anymore. I am so exhausted. I am walking into walls. This is not long-term sustainable, and I'm no longer helping her in the way that she needs.
Right. What an incredible recognition and a perfect segue, really, into talking about professional boundaries, working as a clinician, and ensuring that, as cliched as it sounds, we're putting on that oxygen mask and tank first, which for some of us is quite counterintuitive.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing to learn to do.
Hmm.
You're so, I think for me, and I can say innately wanting to, like that people pleaser, wanting to make everyone else happy first, centering everyone's happiness and well-being, way to learn. Right, but I changed this when I was starting practicum because I realized I did not have the ability to be present with clients and really hear them, validate them, but also be able to just be there alongside with them and
Yes.
really hearing what they're saying because I was not operating at a decent level, like
Sure.
pouring out.
And it's such an innate impulse for so many of us clinicians, especially. And what I've learned over the years is that if we're prioritizing a patient's happiness, as an example, we may be unconsciously on some level robbing them of the ability to experience really powerful additional emotions in the context of a therapy session, such as disappointment. How powerful an emotion is disappointment to work through for a patient who's experiencing that sensation toward us, and really utilizing the therapeutic alliance as a template for navigating what it looks like to work through that emotion.
I haven't never thought about that. That's so true. Being able to, I guess, allow all the human emotions into the therapy room instead of trying to make it so kind of happy and pleasant that they want to be there all the time, but really to be there and they're getting something other than maybe some laughs and smiles.
Right. Right. And look, as a consumer of psychotherapy myself, and I can make the argument that I think every practicing clinician ought to either be in their own active psychotherapy or have a history of real engagement in their own work. It's kind of like going to a personal trainer who says, yeah, I've never worked out before. I certainly wouldn't want to work with them. Um, and Look, I think allowing the full spectrum of all emotions in the room is critical because not everyone's going to want to be in therapy at every single session. And that's okay. They may feel frustrated with the process. They may feel fatigued. They may feel like I have nothing to talk about today. And sometimes I feel like acknowledging that, honoring that, and stating it aloud is such a great catalyst for different layers of work. When someone comes in with a script or a set of bullet points of I want to talk about this, and this, in some ways it can be protective against deeper emotions. Maybe even the sensation of shame or embarrassment or not knowing what to talk about. It can be a way of protecting against vulnerability. So I love those unscripted sessions where someone's like, yeah, you know what? I have nothing to talk about. I really kind of don't want to be here today.
That feels so validating recently. And I'm very new to seeing clients, or this is my second semester. I had clients tell me they hate me. The next session was totally fine. Having a bad day, did not want to be in therapy. And I totally internalized it because I did something wrong. I did not make it a super happy experience. It was like 5 minutes into the session. It was just having a bad day, not knowing what to talk about maybe. And now realizing like they're allowed to have, not that I didn't think that they were allowed to have those feelings or emotions,
Of
but
course.
if they do and they vocalize it toward you,
Yes.
that's just part of it.
Yeah, and hate is such a powerful emotion to be able to work through in a psychotherapy session. It implies that there's a lot of investment in that emotion. There may be a lot of investment in the process on some level, even if it's wanting to get out of therapy. There's still an incredible level of energy surrounding that emotionally. I fear indifference more than I fear hate, because indifference doesn't really give us a ton to work with.
It's so true. I'm so happy we're talking about this. I'm
Same,
it's,
same.
it's not something this is not in the textbooks, right?
No.
Thing we're really talking about what to do when a client says that. It's okay. And not to go home and internalize it for
Right,
them again to see if they're gonna show up or
right.
being big or they're gonna yell at me. What do I do? Just being in my head. I wish this was something I learned before.
Mm. And it comes in time. It comes with trusting your clinical intuition. And I love that you're talking about these themes openly and earnestly. I mean, this is the real kind of meat and potatoes, so to speak, of deep work in psychotherapy is addressing the sort of countertransference, the transference that takes place. How powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And I noticed, so if I work at like a community site where there's a bunch of us who are kind of collaborating, working together. So we can talk a bit about what we're experiencing. And I've noticed how difficult it is for to get conversations where it's like, I actually have no idea what I was supposed to say in that moment. That felt
Mm,
very overwhelming.
mm.
Actually walked into that session and they said something about their parent and I was like went right into my head of a memory of my parent when wasn't present for a second. What should I have done? How can I be more mindful? Just starting to have those conversations and like,
Yes.
oh, we're all going through that and learning. And when one of us figures out a tool, you're like, you know what, this worked for me. Maybe that's something that you can explore. Has been
Yes.
so helpful because otherwise, sitting there in silence, thinking everyone else there, all the other interns who have 50 hours of direct client contact, know better than me. I should know way more at this point, but it's just very new. We're all feeling the same thing.
Totally. And listen, I've been practicing for many years now, and I have that same sensation often of, I don't know what to say in this moment. And typically, I'll do one of two things. One is I'll actually vocalize that to a client. I'm really struggling with what exactly to say to you in this moment and what exactly you might need. Do you have a sense of what that is? The other is to not say anything. How powerful silence and space is. And as therapists, we feel this impulse to fill that space. And again, we don't want to inadvertently suck really powerful emotional oxygen out of a client's healing journey. And sometimes silence is just that powerful emotional oxygen.
So again, going back to what you said how therapists should have a history, therapy would be in therapy. I kind of learning these things from my therapist since I was 9 years old. And I sit there and nod in bed and just wait to see what I'm gonna do. And a lot of times in those moments I laugh.
Hmm.
Talk about that.
Hmm.
That's been really helpful to see my own responses and how much I mean, I can be vulnerable all day and talk about these things clearly, but I don't like to cry in front of someone else. So when that emotion comes up, I laugh. And I didn't realize how much I was feeling now instead of allowing myself to be present in what I was feeling. But
Right.
for allowing that silence, I've learned something really important about my defense mechanism.
Wow. Really incredible stuff.
Yeah,
And I love that you're doing your own work.
it is so important. Not to notice
Critical.
is it's another thing. I wish I learned a little earlier before I started seeing clients. So I could have maybe started making these awareness pieces before. But it's better late than never.
Absolutely. And be proud of that.
Thank you. Thank you. I gotta give myself a little more credit. That's so hard to do.
It is so hard to do. I think we really struggle with that as a society. We feel like we're being perpetual narcissists if we pat ourselves on the back. And, in reality, I think we all need it more than we think we do. And it's typically from ourselves. If we can pat ourselves on the back, we, in a real meaningful sense, we may become or find that we're becoming less reliant on the validation of others, which is also an important and inherently human phenomenon. Oftentimes people say, well, if you're relying on the validation of others, you must be codependent or what's wrong with you? I think it's inherently human, but it's really noticing those trends and patterns where we're feeling that need for approbation, approval. That's critical.
That is so true. And growing up in that phase where I constantly wanted to make everyone else happy, right? I was always seeking that external validation, learning to celebrate myself, validate myself, being able to recognize that I'm doing a great job in a place of learning how to do it.
Exactly.
I'm willing to make mistakes instead of being terrified to make mistakes.
We're in process, work in process. I remember when I was first starting off seeing clients, and this was almost 20 years ago, and I looked very young, and I would have clients comment on how young I looked. They're not doing that today, but back then they were. And I remember feeling this sense of fraudulence or shame. Who am I to know what it's like to be in this person's experience or to help them in some way? And I remember I had a client, it was their first time in psychotherapy ever. And we kind of bonded in a very human level about the novelty of both of the positions that we were in. What is it like to allow that novelty in the room instead of defending it or guarding against that? I would have a supervisor say, well, if somebody brings up your age, kind of encouraging me to be a little bit gamey around that, like, well, I'm older than you might think I am, but not, just kind of coming up with these sarcastic responses, and that felt so disingenuous to me. Instead, just acknowledging that theme of novelty in the room. And what does it look like to allow that in?
That's sad because, damn, I go right on that. Almost like defense, like, no, I can be here. I want to be here and help you.
Right.
I am a good fit. But if I'm not, they're allowed to say that too. But give me a chance, please.
Yeah, exactly. Give me a chance. Right.
It's so exciting and overwhelming and confusing starting out. Does that kind of piece ever get better?
I think, to be very candid with you, every time I walk into a space with a new client, I'm overwhelmed, confused, and scared. And I kind of, on a certain level, hope that fear doesn't go away. It keeps me on my toes to a certain extent. But what has changed over the years is my capacity to work with that and allow that into the room, And I might even draw attention, to the fact that in novel situations, nervousness might be a trend or feeling that emerges for both of us. And let's find a way to talk about that openly in this space. What does the theme of nervousness look like for you? So cultivating a very human emotion and experience, bringing it to light and reflecting it back to a client and allowing them to take space and talking about it, I find that to be a lot more effective than pretending that it doesn't exist.
And like that wasn't the conversation around. It was more of just be confident so that they trust you and they see you as someone who can be there. And that's so true, to be able to acknowledge those emotions that also feel them, so I understand. And things
Mhm.
for both of us. One client, I played a game where there was like a ladder of a bunch of different emotions. You roll with dice, whichever one you got up to. We each had to give an example because it was hard for that client to always know what to say and what I'm going to respond with based on what.
Mhm.
So being able to give an example of a time I felt disappointed. I was like, you know what? I feel disappointed when I called one of my parents for support and they didn't answer me. They couldn't help me. And then the client was able to relate their own experiences within their family unit. And then I got to understand a lot more about them instead of the client being afraid to talk about it because of that kind of idea of how is the therapist going to respond? Or are they going to judge me? So that is so true with, I guess, nervousness in the beginning too.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even not in the beginning, at different phases of the therapeutic relationship. If a therapist is feeling, if I'm feeling stumped and not really knowing which direction to go in, I might ask the client, what's the most important question I should be asking you right now? You know, like, where exactly do we need to start today? You know, putting it into their hands. And I think the more sort of skilled and comfortable we get, we're comfortable transferring this quote unquote power that we oftentimes assume we should exclusively hold.
It feels so validating to know that it's okay to be good for yourself.
Absolutely. It's okay. Not only is it okay, I would say it's a powerful catalyst for meaningful psychotherapy. Because look, if we can't allow messiness and confusion in the room, how are they going to talk about their emotions, which are oftentimes messy and complex? We've got to allow messiness into the room and model what it looks like to walk through that in a way that doesn't involve shamefulness or the forfeiture of our worth.
I, these textbooks do not prepare me. I need,
They're important and critical, but insufficient.
yeah, it's, they give you a lot of information that you need to know to be able to understand how to be there, just not bringing into human experiences. As it mean being in the room and how I might feel. It's very, I guess, textbook situations. It's not
Yes,
for that human experience of it.
exactly. I often get asked by early clinicians what piece of advice I might have for them. And I usually will say, allow yourself to be new at this. What a gift to be new to this and allowing yourself to bring that newness, novelty into the space, into the room. Not in a way that implies, what's the word I'm looking for? Incompetence, but in a way that allows for an expansive dialogue around a very shared human emotion. We all struggle with the sense of fraudulence. We all struggle with the sense of, am I getting this right? Am I doing this right? And I think the more we can just allow that to kind of sit in the room with us, the more patients, clients will feel comfortable to be able to access and talk about that sensation too.
That makes so much sense. And really, once you go deeper, I know when I'm in therapy, I don't always, sometimes I might in the beginning, I might want that superficial. I don't want to have those emotions.
Mhm.
But more over the years, the deeper I've been able to go, the more I've been able to learn about myself and actually being tell. And so it makes sense being a therapist to cultivate that same space.
Indeed.
It's so amazing when I get to talk to therapists and get real experience, real information that's not always readily accessible. And then I can bring all this back to the other trainees,
Yes.
which is amazing as well.
Yes. I hear all the time, and I experienced this too, going to graduate school and becoming a licensed clinician, regardless of if you're getting your master's, your doctorate, whatever, we're not equipped with the skills of how to administratively run a practice. No one's teaching us how to do that. we're also not really equipped with the skill of what it means to be both human and therapist in the room, right? And I think that that's the most beautiful blend when we can both be ourselves and wear the cap of clinician. Clients really see that. They really respond to that vulnerability. And we know that vulnerability begets vulnerability, as Brene Brown famously talks about. So I really am about bringing myself into the room in a way that's professional, in a way that's context appropriate, but also in a way that's kind of fucking real.
How long did it take for you to get to that point?
I'm still working through it and still working on it. It's an evolving trend. It really is. It's an evolution, but I think, a couple of years of feeling like, what the heck am I doing? And how am I going to sort of maintain this facade of expert when I'm really still learning? And hopefully, regardless of how many years I'm practicing, I'll always still be learning. But once I was able to kind of let go of that sense of fraudulence and embrace it as part of the process of learning and discovering and being in the room with my clients, it felt a lot more accessible for me to say, you know what? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that right now. Let's talk about it. Let's explore that collectively. It gave me that freedom to not have all of the sort of perfectly worded, you know, therapist-like statements. It let me be myself. And if we can be ourselves in this very important role, I find that burnout's a lot less likely. We're engaged in the process. We're not staring at the clock as much. And we don't feel like we're on set. We feel like we're really connecting to another human being. And isn't that what this is all about?
Ew. Then, because that's what it is. So I need to just give that therapist response. And I know I am doing like, I'm like, oh, that's so, I know that's what you're supposed to say, but I can say it. So I'm sure my clients are always so excited to hear it too, of being able to find that blend. Like you said, what was one of the first kind of steps maybe that you took to be able to get to that point of embracing that feeling of and being taught and learning? Right, and it's going to be a constant piece of learning.
I think it was my own psychotherapy and really allowing myself to be fully present in the room with really uncomfortable feelings like shame and fraudulence, and even that impulse to appease my therapist. So I would start to say things like, you know what, I'm noticing this impulse of me really wanting you to like me right now. And I'm finding that I'm giving really sort of circumscribed, almost rehearsed responses to your questions. And I want to veer off script a little bit. So noticing that impulse to stay within a certain role, the good patient, right? And allowing myself to veer off script in a safe, structured, contained way. And then bringing that into other spheres of my life, including being a psychotherapist and including being a parent. I often feel this pressure to be the perfect dad and to sort of show up well greased and well oiled and knowing exactly all the right things. And I have no idea what the hell I'm doing 85% of the time. Like, I'm just going to put that out there. As a parent, 85% of the time, as a person, 85% of the time, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And I have enough resources, skills, tools, support to be able to figure it out if I can allow myself to get a little bit lost and to be comfortable with being a little bit lost. And I think so much of the journey of finding ourselves, of healing, is acknowledging that we're lost and making that okay to be lost. Like, how cool is it to be lost? and to discover some new places and not know where we're going. It kind of forces upon us this mindfulness. We have nowhere else to go but being present in that moment. And we can either torture ourselves and really suffer or embrace the art of not knowing where the heck we are. I choose the latter. I think it's a lot more enjoyable and forgiving.
Feeling of having to be perfect all the time is overwhelming. And then it leads to that kind of ultimate feeling of shame and disappointment because I'm not perfect all the time and I don't know. And why don't I know? And all those shoulds and what ifs and could ifs.
Hey,
What?
it is. And perfect, I learned over the years, is a really unrelatable state. I've never had anyone come up to me, a client, a friend, a family member who says to me, you know what? I feel really connected to you right now because you're doing this perfectly. No one's ever said that. I think what people respond to is imperfection, is coloring outside of the lines, is messiness. As long as we're able to embrace that as part of our story and talk about it in a way where we're really inspired to dig deeper and learn a little bit more about ourselves as a result of being quite lost, I think people really gravitate to that.
And growth what really happens when you get out of your comfort zone, when you allow yourself to not know something that's
Yeah,
hard to learn and to embrace. And I'm trying.
totally. And look, I think a comfort zone is such a misnomer because let's face it, comfort zones really aren't that great. They're not even that comfortable. They're familiar, but they don't really allow for any new opportunities, any new discoveries. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to eat at the same restaurant every single day, right? That's comfortable, familiar, but I don't know how great that is. So I think comfort zones are overrated.
I love the way you just framed that.
Yeah.
So it's true. I don't want to eat the same restaurants every day. I want to explore. I want to find new things that I enjoy. And that's how life should always be. It kind of came out of that psychiatric unit 6 years ago and just stayed in that feeling of kind of familiarity. I never who wanted to launch a nonprofit, who wanted to have conversations like that. I would have just been stuck in that position of I don't know what to do, someone save me.
Yes. And at some point in your personal professional journey, you're going to have a client say to you who's really, really struggling, maybe with suicidality. It's going to say to you, you know what? You have no idea what this is like. And how powerful will it be for you to disclose in an appropriate way? You know what? Actually, I do. And I've been there too. And there's a way out. People are going to hear you and resonate with that so much more than if you just follow the textbook protocol of what we're supposed to say and do. I mean, that stuff is really important and necessary, but adding that human component of, you know what, actually, I have been there and it really, really fucking sucks. And there's a way out.
That is so true because I sometimes tiptoe around, and I talk about it all the time, but in therapy, I tiptoe around to suicidality whenever it's about that house of talks, whether tiptoe around it because I don't know what the therapist is going to say because it feels like, oh, they won't know. But if they did say, oh, I felt that way too. It's
Right?
feeling of it's okay to talk about it. The therapist is not thinking that something is still bothering me. They're not judging me. They're not ready to just walk. We have a automated key. They're willing
Totally.
conversations.
Listen, in today's day and age, if someone hasn't experienced some form of passive suicidality, some suicidal fantasy, or just thought about suicide in some way, they're not breathing or they're a robot. Because I think to contemplate our mortality, to contemplate our life force, and to really wonder what it would be like to no longer be here is an inherent part of being human. Obviously, there are varying degrees, and I certainly don't want to normalize what it's like to be actively suicidal. However, I think most people, if they're being really honest with themselves, are able to reflect that they too have contemplated what it might be like to no longer be here.
Really, when we start normalizing that conversation, it really helps people feel less alone in it and reduces that stigma on how to this expectation of I have to self-isolate. Instead, open communication, open conversations that help you feel validated. Know that this is so normal. We can talk about it. We can learn things that ain't love us.
Yes,
Alone in it, don't feel that shame. Allow it to exist and allow ourselves to, like you said, grow.
absolutely. Well said.
I so appreciate this conversation. This has been so incredibly helpful for you on so many different levels. As you're,
So happy to hear that.
thank you so much. As we are wrapping up, what's one last piece of advice you'd like to give to each therapist? I put you on the spot there.
No, I'm taking this question seriously. I would say don't let anyone tell you that you can't be the therapist that you want to be. You know, so many of our dreams, or my dreams, were kind of shattered in early grad school. I had a professor who said, "You'll never make a living in private practice." And I was fortunate enough on some level to just have proverbial earplugs on during that time of my life where it meant, very little, and I didn't really hear a lot of that. But I'm so grateful I didn't listen because I have the practice and professional life that I've always wanted for myself. And it took a lot of work, but I'm so grateful it did because the work is what makes it worth it.
Oh, I so needed to hear that as I'm taking my very last class, and that was one of the first things the teacher said to us. And I was like, how are you saying that in our very last class? Put every student into a panic of why are we here? We're not going to be able to afford the cost of living. And
Ignore them. Ignore.
will do. Thank you again so much for all of the insight advice you provided today.
My pleasure. It's been an honor to be on. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and thank you for including me in today's discussion.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.